Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into some really complex and, frankly, pretty disturbing history.
We are. It's important stuff, though.
We're going to be exploring Richard Weikart's book, From Darwin to Hitler, Evolutionary Ethics, Eugenics, and Racism in Germany.
A controversial title and a controversial subject.
Definitely. Think of this as us trying to unpack how certain scientific ideas, specifically Darwin's theory, got interpreted or maybe misinterpreted and applied in Germany back then.
Yeah, looking at the impact on ethics, eugenics, racism. It's a heavy mix.
Our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is really to dig into Weikart's analysis. He uses a lot of sources from the book itself, prefaces, chapters, conclusions.
Right, he's tracing how Darwinism, or at least how it was understood in late 19th, early 20th century Germany.
Exactly. How it intersected with these really potent ideas about human value, about society, about race.
And it's crucial, as Weikart points out, that these weren't just like fringe theories floating around.
No, that's the key point, isn't it?
Yeah. His work shows these ideas were actually discussed, debated, often accepted within the mainstream German scientific and intellectual communities.
So we're looking at how a biological theory kind of morphed or got woven into these social and political ideologies.
With truly devastating outcomes down the line, obviously.
Okay, so let's start near the beginning. Concerns popped up almost immediately, didn't they? Even in Darwin's time.
They did. Adam Sedgwick, who was actually one of Darwin's mentors, a geologist, he voiced fears early on about the ethical side of things.
The potential moral consequences.
Exactly. And it wasn't long before others picked that up. There was Robbie Kosman, a zoologist, later a medical professor.
What did he say? This was around 1880.
Yeah, 1880. He made this really stark claim that basically, if you accept a Darwinian worldview, you have to ditch the sentimental conception of individual human life's value.
Wow. So ditch sentimentality for what?
For favoring the more excellently endowed, as he put it. He even argued that progress, Darwinian progress, might require the destruction of the less well-endowed.
That's incredibly blunt. Putting the excellent life above the less excellent.
Right. He saw it as almost a state imperative. So right away you see natural selection being translated into this, well, social and political idea.
And fast forward a bit, these aren't just abstract thoughts. 1917, you have Fritz Lenz.
A well-known Darwinian biologist, geneticist, very prominent.
He writes this article, Race as a Principle of Value. And the really chilling part is later, in 33.
He actually boasted about it, said that article contained the, quote, basic characteristics of the National Socialist worldview.
That's a direct line he's drawing there.
Yeah.
It's deeply unsettling.
It is, and it counters that narrative you sometimes hear that Hitler's ideas were just pseudoscience, totally separate from real science.
Right, like it was all just crackpot stuff.
But Weikart and others show that wasn't really the case. Many respected German scientists, doctors, professors, people not initially even Nazis, held Darwinian and eugenic views that were, well, disturbingly similar.
So the focus isn't just Hitler. It's the broader intellectual current. How Darwinism affected the way people thought about life, death, value.
Exactly. The whole framework for understanding humanity's place.
Okay, and we should probably clarify what Darwinism means here. Weikart uses it mainly for Darwin's core theory, right? Natural selection.
Primarily, yes. Evolution through natural selection from origin of species. But he does note that the term was used more loosely back then.
Like sometimes it just meant evolution in general, or even just a naturalistic outlook.
Yeah, or sometimes it included Lamarckism too, the inheritance of acquired characteristics. That's important because, as Weikart points out, most German biologists followed Ernst Haeckel's lead.
Ah, Haeckel. Hugely influential figure.
Immensely. And Haeckel synthesized Darwinism and Lamarckism, so the Darwinism influencing Germany wasn't always pure Darwin, so to speak.
Got it. So, for many of these thinkers, Haeckel, Goldschmidt, Thorne, Ludwig Buchner, Darwinism became more than just biology.
Oh, much more. It was central to a new worldview, materialistic, naturalistic.
Challenging traditional religion head-on.
Absolutely. They saw it as providing a scientific basis for understanding the world without needing God or spiritual explanations. Philosophical materialism, the idea that matter is all there is.
And people felt this personally. You mentioned Alfred Grotjahn.
Right. He later became big in eugenics. He recalled reading Buchner's Force and Matter and how it just shattered his religious faith.
And replaced it with positivism, focusing on earthly values.
Yes, and Grotjahn said many in his generation had similar experiences. These popular science writings championing Darwinism were incredibly impactful.
So let's map out how this Darwinian worldview specifically started reshaping ethics. What were the key pathways?
Weikart lays out several. First, it offered a non-theistic origin for ethics, making materialism and positivism seem more, well, scientifically grounded.
Okay, so it provided a natural explanation for morality.
In theory, yes. Before Darwin, it was harder for purely naturalistic views to explain, say, altruism or our innate moral sense. Darwinism suggested social instincts could evolve.
Makes sense? What else?
Second, it fueled ethical relativism. If ethics just evolve naturally,
Then it's not fixed or absolute, it changes.
exactly, it undermines the idea of timeless, transcendent moral laws. Third, it supported the view that morality is basically a biological instinct.
Not divine, not purely rational, but baked into our biology.
Fourth, the core concepts struggle for existence. Natural selection, they inevitably made people rethink existing ethical norms. Hans Joachim Koch noted this.
People started questioning social, economic, political ethics through this new lens.
Right. And finally, and maybe most profoundly, it changed how people saw human nature itself and the value of human life. That had huge knock-on effects.
One of those being a much stronger emphasis on biological inequality.
Yes, Darwinism inherently focuses on variation within species. Apply that to humans, and it becomes a handy justification for social hierarchies, racial divisions.
Things that already existed but now had a scientific backing.
Precisely. And then there's natural selection itself. The implication is that the death of the less fit isn't just natural, it's potentially beneficial for the species' progress.
Which clashes directly with the traditional view of death as, an evil to be avoided.
Completely. Darwin himself, in Origin of Species, talks about the war of nature, from famine and death, leading to the production of higher animals.
Acknowledging death's role in evolutionary advancement. Stark.
Very. And this wasn't just happening in Germany. People in Britain and elsewhere were trying to build ethical systems on evolution too.
But the reception in Germany was varied.
Yes, some German Darwinists saw it as revolutionary, demanding a total break from old morality, especially Christian ethics. Others tried to harmonize it, like Darwin himself sometimes did.
But most were somewhere in between. A bit ambivalent.
Weikart argues yes. They saw Darwinism supporting some traditional morals but undermining others. This ambiguity opened the door for different interpretations.
Leading to various social Darwinist thinkers trying to spell out the ethical implications,
Right.
like Max Nordau.
Right. Nordau agreed with the struggle idea, but he thought morality came from humans struggling against the environment, not just each other.
Interesting twist. Cooperation against nature.
Yeah, and he thought morality started rationally but would eventually become a fixed, inherited biological trait.
Okay. Then there was Sigmund Gizicki. He sounds quite emphatic.
He was. Gizicki argued evolutionary theory forces ethics to reject anything contrary or opposed to nature. For him, that meant freeing ethics from religion entirely.
A purely secular, this worldly morality.
Based on science demonstrating, as he saw it, this relentless lawfulness governing everything, including humans. We're part of nature, not above it.
And August Forel, the psychiatrist and ant expert.
His ant studies were key. He saw parallels between ant colonies and human society, leading him to embrace moral relativism.
No absolute good or bad, just evolving biological instinct.
Pretty much. He thought Darwinism showed morality was hereditary, instinctual, like social behavior in ants.
Ludwig Buchner seems central here too, emphasizing heredity.
Hugely. Not just for physical traits, but mental and moral ones too. His book, The Power of Heredity, argued virtues, vices, even criminality were largely inherited.
Downplaying environment, boosting biology.
Very much so. He believed our core predispositions were biological, though education could play some role.
And this focus on biology spilled into other fields, like psychiatry.
Definitely. Cesare Lombroso, influenced by Darwin and Haeckel, came up with the born criminal theory.
The idea that some people are biologically predisposed to crime.
Yeah.
Like evolutionary throwbacks.
Exactly. Atavism. He even tried to find physical markers, like skull shapes linked to criminal types. Widely discredited now, but very influential then.
So as these ideas circulate, some thinkers start seeing evolutionary progress itself as the highest good, the ultimate ethical principle.
Yes, like Gustav Retzenhofer. He believed nature's drive for progress basically trumped traditional morality.
Nature overrides ethics if they conflict.
In his view, yes. Alexander Tiller went even further, mixing Darwinism and Nietzsche.
What was his focus?
The elevation and more excellent formation of the human race. Actions judged by their impact on future generations' biology and minds.
And that led to his honor your child idea.
Yes, replacing honoring parents. Focus on the future biological stock. He was openly critical of Christian ethics, seeing them as hindering racial advancement.
Which brings us to Nietzsche himself. He engaged with evolutionary ideas, though maybe not purely Darwinian ones.
Right, influenced by others like Nageli, Roux, Rolfe. He critiqued Darwinian natural selection, but his ideas about struggle, power, rejecting pity for the decadent.
They resonated with the broader mood.
Absolutely. His call to prohibit decadence from procreating, thou shalt not procreate, certainly fit with emerging eugenic thought.
Speaking of eugenics, Alfred Ploetz is a key figure.
Central. Founder of the German eugenics movement, really. For him, the highest moral principle was preserving healthy, strong, flourishing life.
And race hygiene eugenics was the way to achieve that.
It was the ethical imperative, as he saw it, focused on the biological health of the German race.
His brother-in-law, Nordenholz, was even more blunt.
Anastasius Nordenholz, yeah, said the highest principle is promoting reproduction of the more fit racial elements, even at the expense of the unfit.
He argued solidarity has limits when it comes to eliminating inferior elements.
Explicitly. Traditional morals like solidarity were only useful if they served that ultimate biological goal. Astonishingly direct.
And then the pathologist Hugo Ribert claimed a thoroughly healthy person just cannot act badly or wickedly.
Yeah, linking physical health directly to morality. Moral failing becomes a symptom of biological defect. Improve biology, improve morality.
It's interesting that even groups like the Ethical Culture Society had Darwinian influences.
Right, while not their main focus, figures like Gizicki saw Darwinism as a basis for the secular ethics they were promoting.
And the Krupp Prize competition, set up with Haeckel's involvement.
Focused specifically on political applications of Darwinism, which inevitably involved ethics. The guidelines stressed heredity of character, adaptation.
Suggesting a biological basis for society and morals.
Exactly. Ziegler, who wrote the guidelines, built that in. Even those who doubted basing ethics entirely on science, like Ruppin or Hess, still backed eugenics and heritable moral traits.
Hess even thought moral codes themselves evolved through selection.
Yes, societal moral codes being naturally selected over time.
And Haeckel's Monist League had a very clear agenda.
Absolutely. Replace religion with monism based on evolution, including a naturalistic ethics. Promoting secular moral teaching was key for them.
All this collectively leads to a shift, a significant devaluation of human life.
It seems unavoidable. Darwinism changed humanity's place in the cosmos. Haeckel himself said human life looked different after evolution theory.
He didn't think all lives were equally valuable.
Not at all. He wrote that to his father back in 1864. Kosman argued only some lives were worth protecting, and politics should serve eugenics.
Even Dodel, who was more humane, admitted Darwinism removed humanity's special status, stressed our animal links.
Right. It leveled the playing field between humans and animals in a way that had profound ethical consequences.
This then feeds into worries about contra-selection, Haeckel's term.
Yes. The fear that helping the weak and sick through medicine, charity, etc., actually harms the species by letting unfit traits persist and reproduce.
It's contra-selective because it interferes with natural selection, weeding out the less fit.
Exactly. Though defining fit and unfit here involves a value judgment beyond just survival, doesn't it?
True. What did Haeckel see as causes of this contra-selection?
He pointed to modern medicine, clerical celibacy, because he thought priests were often intellectually superior but weren't reproducing in modern warfare, which he worried killed off the fittest young men.
It's sobering that even some Darwinists at the time, like Wilhelm Bolsche, saw this trend and protested against it.
Yeah, Bolsche was a Darwinist but worried about the devaluing of life in those circles. It shows there was some internal critique, but the dominant trend was worrying.
And that trend particularly targeted the disabled, the unproductive.
Yes. You had figures like Vacher de la Puge in France, influential in Germany, wanting to replace liberty, equality, fraternity with determinism, inequality, selection.
Oof. Biological determinism over political ideals.
And Clemens Royer worried that protecting the weak just perpetuated ills. This focus on biological inequality became a core argument for human evolution itself.
And a weapon against socialism?
Very much so. Many Darwinists, Haeckel, Schmidt, Preyer, used the natural inequality argument to attack socialist ideas of human equality.
Saw socialism as unnatural, anti-scientific.
Exactly. Though Buchner had a slightly different take. He accepted biological inequality, but thought capitalism messed up the struggle by favoring the rich, not the biologically fit.
So he supported some socialist ideas like abolishing inheritance, but within an inegalitarian framework.
Right, a fascinating, if troubling mix. But the main thrust, especially in eugenics, was differentiating sharply between valuable and less valuable lives.
Labeling the handicapped as inferior, useless burdens. Barr, Goldstein.
The language is stark, pestilent, ballast, calculating the economic cost of the inferior, advocating segregation.
And economic productivity became a yardstick for human worth.
Mm,
Forel, Schallmeyer.
yes. Ranking people by their economic contribution. A fit person contributes more than they consume if you couldn't contribute economically.
You were devalued, seen as a drain.
Precisely, and this framework easily extended to race.
Darwin himself, emphasizing heritable mental traits, downplaying environment that had bad consequences for race.
Devastating. It provided grist for the mill of racial prejudice. And his belief that savage races would likely be exterminated by civilized races.
That's in Descent of Man, right?
Yes, it gave a kind of predictive, evolutionary justification for what many already believed or hoped for.
And Haeckel ran with this, creating his racial hierarchy.
Oh, absolutely. His 10 human species, ranking woolly-haired races as generally inferior. He even recommended reading Gobineau, the arch-racist theorist.
Arguing in The Wonders of Life that the value of races is very unequal.
Explicitly. His work was hugely popular and spread these racist ideas widely under a scientific banner.
Buchner, too, despite his Lamarckism, saw races as fundamentally different mentally and physically. Innate racial character, limiting education.
Yes, he believed in innate racial differences and saw the lowest races heading for extinction, with Caucasians destined to dominate.
Hellwald stressed hereditary racial traits, too. English enterprise versus South American laziness, Black African inferiority, even anti-Semitism.
Right, blaming Jews for hindering great artists and statesmen. It shows how easily Darwinian concepts were twisted to fit existing prejudices.
Even Ratzel, who tried to be less overtly prejudiced.
Still used higher and lower peoples, implied European biological superiority in mixing, and doubted primitive peoples had the same basic human material.
Klotch pushed polygenism, separating Europeans and Australians from supposedly inferior Black Africans linked to Neanderthals.
Yes, suggesting separate origins to create even deeper biological divisions between races.
And the 1890s saw a real explosion of this stuff. Biological racism, Aryan supremacy, anti-Semitism, all dressed up as Darwinian science.
A definite escalation, moving from general comments to a flood of publications promoting these toxic ideas with seeming scientific authority.
Eugenics and racism become deeply intertwined. Plitz committed to German racial purity.
Even if he sometimes downplayed it publicly for strategic reasons, his core goal was preserving the purity of the German race.
Schallmeyer rejected Nordic extremism but still believed in a hierarchy. Black Africans mentally inferior.
Yes, he still spoke of higher and lower races based on mental abilities, placing Africans lower. The hierarchical thinking persisted.
And Houston Stewart Chamberlain wove Darwinian struggle and selection into his racial theories, seeing the Teutonic Jewish struggle as fundamental.
Yeah, his massively influential work framed racial conflict, especially with Jews, as an inescapable Darwinian battle.
Darwinism's reach even extended to sexual morality. Forel again.
Yes, in the sexual question. He wanted a sexual morality based on evolution aimed at improving biology.
His rule being basically, don't harm others sexually, promote happiness, and views on masturbation, homosexuality.
He saw them as morally neutral if they didn't harm offspring potential. He wanted to overturn Judeo-Christian ethics based on biological effects.
Schallmeyer agreed, prioritizing the race's flourishing over individual happiness and sexual rules.
Correct. The collective biological outcome trumped individual concerns.
Helene Stocker's League for the Protection of Mothers mixed Darwinism and Nietzsche for a new ethics, including sexual liberation.
Yes, but that put them at odds with eugenicists like Pletz, who didn't want to support all single mothers, only the fit ones.
A clash between feminist liberation and strict eugenic selection.
Exactly, and birth control was another battleground.
Feminist eugenicists saw it as a way to limit births among the inferior poor.
Yes, they saw it as a tool to counter perceived dysgenic trends, higher birth rates among the less fit.
But Pletz opposed indiscriminate birth control. He wanted medical, eugenic control.
Right. He worried about individuals making choices that harmed the nation's biological health, like reducing births among the fit. He distrusted neo-Malthusianism and radical feminists joining his society.
Grotchen was more nuanced, Sympathetic to feminism, but still warning about birth control without considering biological value.
Yeah, trying to balance feminist concerns with the eugenic goal of promoting high birth rates among the high-quality population.
And marriage reform. Eugenicists push for premarital health exams,
Strongly. The Society for Race Hygiene, the Monist League, they all endorsed mandatory exams to check hereditary health before marriage.
leading to voluntary marriage counseling centers giving eugenic advice.
Yes, promoting responsible reproduction based on heredity.
There was even debate about polygamy for eugenic ends.
Some supported it, Ehrenfels. Others dismissed it, Miller-Lyer. Others opposed it for monogamy, Gruber, Pletz. Shows the range of ideas, but the goal was always maximizing good heredity.
Which brings us to the darkest territory. Killing the unfit. Haeckel was an early proponent.
Disturbingly early and vocal. He mentioned Spartan infanticide favorably in his Natural History of Creation.
And rejected the soul, saw suicide as self-redemption, supported assisted suicide, and even involuntary killing of the mentally ill.
Yes, proposing a commission of doctors to decide, without patient consent, a direct result of his materialistic Darwinian view where life's value wasn't absolute.
The Monist League debated voluntary euthanasia, Oswald linking it to an energetic imperative.
Right, prioritizing resource efficiency. Even objections focused on how to implement it, not the intrinsic value of the suffering person's life.
The value calculus shifted dramatically.
It did. And while eugenics initially focused on limiting reproduction, talk of infanticide and involuntary euthanasia, especially for the mentally ill, started creeping in.
Hellwald praising Spartan infanticide, Plutz describing a utopia with infanticide for weak babies.
Even if oblique, it normalized the idea. Agnes Bloom urged doctors to consider the loss to the nation from imbeciles.
Agar comparing killing the disabled to capital punishment, and Hoche lamenting the ban on killing the completely worthless.
Chilling stuff. Hoche and Binding's work calling for a revision of moral codes to allow this was incredibly radical and influential later.
It seems vital to stress Darwinism's role here. Not all Darwinists agreed, but the theory itself
Played a huge role. Reducing humans to animals, stressing inequality, seeing death of the unfit as natural, even progressive. It created the intellectual space for this debate.
a debate that just didn't exist in the same way before Darwinism became widespread. Early advocates were Darwinists. Haeckel popularized it.
And they grounded their arguments in naturalistic interpretations of Darwin. It undeniably fueled this drastic shift.
Darwinism also got tangled up with militarism. Haeckel, despite some pacifist moments, became a strong nationalist.
A fervent one, yeah, supporting German expansionism even after WWI's horrors. While some Darwinists remained pacifists, many weren't.
And Darwinian ideas offered new justifications for war, struggle for existence between nations.
Exactly. War framed as natural, necessary biological law. Population outstripping resources, leading to inevitable conflict, seen as driving progress.
Sumner in the U.S. said similar things. Peschel saw war as a lawful evolutionary process. Jaeger, Strauss.
Strauss, in The Old and the New Faith, called war inescapable, winnowing peoples by value, ridiculed peace efforts. Hellwald saw it as ensuring the triumph of higher culture.
And Bernhardi's infamous book, Germany and the Next War.
Explicitly argued Darwinism proves war is a biological necessity to avoid degeneration, the right of the stronger reigns, hugely influential in painting Germany as driven by social Darwinism.
But some pacifism existed, even if ambivalent. Haeckel's collapsed, but
Till supported pacifism between European nations only to preserve strength for the global racial struggle, a very cynical eugenic pacifism.
Eugenicists worried about war killing the fit,
Yeah.
but sometimes saw it as useful against lower peoples.
Schaumeyer.
Yes, ambivalence there. War could be dysgenic for Europeans, but potentially selective against non-Europeans.
Yep.
More consistent pacifists, like Dodel, argued for reason to overcome the struggle.
Yes, believing humans could consciously mitigate it.
And Bertha von Suttner, the peace activist, influenced by Darwinian materialism, optimistic about progress towards peace.
Yes, but even she seemed to accept the idea of evolutionary progress potentially involving the decline or extermination of primitive peoples, though she didn't advocate a policy of it.
Just saw it as maybe inevitable. Shows how pervasive that thinking was.
Extremely pervasive. The idea of races in a death struggle, leading to annihilation of the inferior, became widespread in the German press before WWI.
Gollwitzer noted this. Even pacifists sometimes accepted extermination of inferior races as okay for global progress. H.G. Wells quote.
It's shocking how common that became. Racial war is a natural process.
And this directly fed into colonialism. Darwinian struggle replacing religious justifications.
Yes, colonial propaganda shifted. Officials argued natives only had a right to live if they served German interests, purely utilitarian based on perceived racial hierarchy.
Echoing Darwin's own prediction about savage races being exterminated.
And Haeckel seeing it as natural. Rolla, Schmidt, Buchner, Krauss, they all repeated this theme. Some framed it as peaceful competition, others acknowledged violence but saw extermination as progress.
Gompovitz focused his sociology on racial struggle. Ratzel's Lebensraum theory justified conquest as natural selection.
Exactly. Voltman and Ammon saw war as a good deed, ensuring the fittest nations win. Younger anthropologists like Eugen Fischer adopted this inevitability of racial extermination.
Plutz and Schaumeyer saw eugenics as the way to win the racial struggle.
Prepare the German race for that ultimate conflict.
And radical anti-Semites started calling for extermination.
Yeah.
While others proposed peaceful elimination through intermarriage.
Yes, the goal was elimination, the means debated. This all directly influenced German imperialism and colonial policy.
The Harrow Revolt being a prime example. Trotha explicitly using Darwinian racial war language to justify annihilation.
A horrifyingly clear case. And while controversial back home, opposition in the Reichstag was limited mainly to Social Democrats and the Catholic Center Party. The ideas had taken root.
Which brings us finally to Hitler's worldview. He constantly appealed to nature, didn't he? Struggle as inescapable law.
Absolutely. Only rights won through struggle were valid. He scorned humaneness, Christian morality.
Redefined humane as destroying the weak to benefit the strong, the Aryan race.
Yes. For him, racial competition was the engine of evolution. His strategy was twofold: eugenics inside Germany, racial war outside.
Believing Germans were morally superior, so eliminating others was actually a moral improvement for the world.
In his twisted view, yes. Traditional morality was irrelevant if it hindered the Aryan race. Racial considerations trumped everything.
Deriding pity, sympathy is unnatural, his most holy human right being.
Keeping blood pure for a more noble evolution. Pure social Darwinism, racial hygiene taken to its absolute extreme.
And the Munich environment, pan-Germanism, the eugenics movement there, figures like Lehman the publisher, they reinforce these ideas.
Undoubtedly. His ideology didn't spring from nowhere. It was a radical synthesis of ideas already circulating, particularly in that Munich milieu.
And the complicity of scientists, physicians, it's undeniable. Ryden co-authoring commentary on the sterilization law, supporting racial laws.
It's a tragic and crucial part of the story. The active involvement of professionals shows how deeply these ideas permeated, leading directly to atrocities.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, the main themes are pretty clear. Darwinism applied to ethics led to a re-evaluation, often devaluation, of human life.
Which fueled eugenics, entangled it with racism, and was used to justify conflict and extermination through that Darwinian lens of struggle and fitness.
A transformation of moral concepts, arguing for a naturalistic ethics based on progress and inequality.
And the irony, rejecting traditional morality while claiming European, especially German, morality was superior based on these new natural principles.
It leaves us with some heavy questions. What's the lasting impact of these interpretations? How does understanding this past inform today's debates about science, ethics, human diversity?
And what responsibility do we have to critically examine the potential social fallout of scientific theories, to ensure they're used for understanding, not destruction?
Crucial questions. Definitely something for you, the listener, to ponder long after we finish here.